Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us here on the Father Show today. And I'm your host, Mike Thompson. Today, we've got a fantastic show for you. And on our show today, we have Bruce. And Bruce has been leading fathers groups for new dads for a long time. He's founded the Fathers Forum, which we'll be talking about. And he formed that when he became a father and realized he was not as prepared for fatherhood as he thought. He discovered the best ways for dad to understand the challenges of becoming a father was to meet with other fathers and share their stories. So currently, due to this COVID pandemic, the Father Forum offers a virtual group for new dads. And Bruce is a marriage and family therapist. He's received his doctorate from his research on men's development as fathers. He is also the author of several books, and most of the books he has out, and he'll tell us about it. But he also has the newest one is the Fatherhood, the journey from man to dad. So, ladies and gentlemen, I ask that you will welcome Dr. Bruce Linton of the Father Forum. Bruce, how you doing today?
Hi, Mike. Hey, thanks for inviting me on the show. And thank you for the work that you do too. And for the spirit that we share in trying to reach out and support men in their roles as dads.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you. As I told you before the show started, you one of the first people that I met that's been doing this longer than I. And I started in 2004, and you started long before that. So I thank you, and it's a blessing and an honor to meet you, to talk with you, and to have you on the show. And I know our fathers or expected fathers out there are going to get a wealth of knowledge, from our conversation today.
Well, thank you. Well, um, let me share a little bit with you how I got started on this journey. And I think we all have our journeys when we become dads, and I've been lucky to have my journey and my work kind of integrated together. But that came about not from any lofty idea or inspiration. It came about because of survival. Um, and it started out when my wife at the time said she thought we should have kids or have a child. And I was so shocked. I'd never thought about becoming a father.
Really?
And she said, wow, that's the first time there was something I really didn't want to discuss at length with her. That was something because I always like to talk about things and, I would kind of drive her crazy talking about something to the nth degree. But when we first wanted to have a kid, you didn't want to talk very much about that. Um, so I made my list, like why would I want to be a dad and why wouldn't I want to be a dad? And at a certain point, I realized I wasn't going to be anything I could figure out with a list. I would have to take a leap of faith. And I was studying to be a marriage and family therapist. So I thought, well, that's going to be helpful because I'm reading about families and the transition to parenthood. And my wife at the time was a nursery nurse. So I thought, oh, this is going to be really easy. I mean, who's going to have it better than me? I have a wife who's a nursery nurse. Well, it turned out, as I think many of us new dads find out, much harder than I anticipated. And I was really struggling. And I was a bit inspired by John Lennon from the Beatles because I had heard him on the radio talk about his son, Sean, and saying that, wow, he really felt being a dad was the greatest thing. And I had been so inspired by John Lennon and his music. And when I heard him say that, it gave me a pause to reflect that there's something more going on here than I was aware of. But the first thing I became aware of was how unprepared I really was to be a dad. Now, I had gone to prenatal classes and I'd gone to all the things that we did to get ready to be a father. But then, what happened, in that first labor of my wife, about 16 hours later, after she went into labor and we had a baby, what was going to happen then, I wasn't really prepared for. So as we struggled through that first year, I was really aware that, hey, this is really something that I have to find out more about. Now, I was very lucky because I had been for a number of years in a men's group. And I don't know if some of your listeners are old enough to remember the poet Robert Bly and the mythologist Michael Meade, but they did these men's groups all around the country, and I participated in them. And I remember going to one of the conferences very early on, and they were doing different groups for men, men talking about different issues that were important in men's lives. And I was saying to Robert Bly, I was saying, oh, Robert, I want to do a group for men who are fathers. And he said, Bruce, we already have a group for men who want to talk about their fathers. I said, no, I want to do a group for men who are fathers. And because there weren't a lot of men there who were fathers yet. So I got together with this group of men. And the first thing we said is, how did you get away for like a few days to come to a conference like this? Because we all had young children. And I really realized that even in the men's movement, our role as dads was really not getting supported. So I then on my own got together, went out and just talked with friends or friend of friends. And I got together 6 guys to meet who we were all new fathers. We had kids that were anywhere from about 6 months old to about 3 years old. We got together, and Mike, the first meeting, what we decided we'd like to do is we'd all just like to take a nap on the couches in the office. Like we were all just so exhausted. But then we began to talk about the changes we were going through as men as we became fathers, and how it was affecting our marriages, how it was affecting our careers, how we were beginning to think of our own fathers now in a way we'd never thought about them before. And it was out of that group I realized when we met for a few months, I realized, hey, I'm a family therapist. This is an area that nobody's really talking about. I want to offer this to the community. And so I started the Fathers Forum. And I think the basic premise was, at that time, and still today, there are lots of ways the culture burdens us as men in terms of who we have to be, who we should be, who we're expected to be. And in that, work is always held up very high. Like, usually first question people get, what's your job? It'd be kind of cool. Maybe someday people will say, hey, you have kids? But anyway, right now they say, what's your job? So I've been trying through the Fathers Forum not to devalue work, because work's very important in our life.
Right.
Very much so. I mean, it gives us meaning in lots of ways. But I want to raise the status of parenthood in our lives.
Yeah.
And I think I want to raise that status and that relationship in the culture in general, but us as men too, supporting each other in fatherhood. And, as I've done the groups over the years, I found that even though we're all going to parent and deal with fatherhood a little differently, we're all going to go through the same thing. We're all going to go through a set of stages, a kind of phases, a kind of struggles, and you're going to work it out with, your wife, and I'm going to work it out with my wife. It's going to be different, but we're all going to face those same issues.
Yeah.
And then I found that if I could bring dads together, research on, that fathers would provide for themselves the expertise, the help, and the support that they needed. And the hearing each other's stories is what made the biggest difference. I might
Mm-hmm.
not do it like you do it, but I
Mm-hmm.
hear how you do it and I hear how you're doing it. And maybe I borrow from that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I look at that and say, no, I would really do it a little differently.
Yeah,
And
because you're doing it off of your own experience. Whether you had a father in your life or you didn't have a father in your life. So I think when we look at it and when we are being fathers, we go off of what we've learned already and maybe what we were taught, and that might even just become from the mother.
that's true. And I think what you're saying uh, is very central to the work of the Fathers Forum. If I can hear your story of your experience, it's going to be different than mine.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to enrich my life.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to enrich my life. That's going to broaden my perspective. Now, I think one of the things, and I kind of bring my, therapy hat to doing some of this too to help facilitate the group. But I think, unfortunately for us as men, and there's a long history to this, but we often are competitive with each other, and kind of, well, you've noticed that.
Oh yeah.
And so in the group, we do kind of see how to get beyond that or to how to let go of that. So I can hear your experience of what you're doing and not feeling like I'm competing with it, but really hearing it as an offering to me as a way, another perspective. So
Yeah.
we move in the group from a feeling of competitiveness to a feeling of, oh, we're sharing a journey together and we're all having a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes in the group, Mike, it felt like when we talked about how to handle a certain situation as a parent, and one dad would offer this, another dad would offer this. I remember commenting at one time, there was five guys in the group at the time, so six including me. So I said, sometimes it feels like it takes six men talking about fatherhood to bring one really good father into the room. It was sort of like we were all building this dad, this wise dad that could help us all out. So
But
I think that,
yeah. No, go ahead.
uh, oh, I was going to say, so I think that is one of the really important things I found in my research was that dads who had participated, and it didn't have to be in the Fathers Forum group, but had a relationship with a group of men where they were talking about fatherhood specifically, particularly in the early years. It doesn't mean they can't talk about football or they can't
Mm-hmm.
talk about sports or business or, but that if they can specifically be there just talking about becoming a dad, that those men over a year, 2 years out, when I talked with them later, they found that they had more enjoyment in parenthood. They enjoyed being parents more, and they felt more competent as
Yeah.
parents than dads who had to go it alone.
Well,
That
let me
was
ask
just
you, do you think that, one of the things that I always say is, to tell fathers that you're not alone in this journey. So do you think that because they're coming and because they have multiple fathers talking to them, that they realize that this is a journey that they're not on their own. They're not out there all by themselves on a boat in the middle of the ocean with no help and no paddle and no oars and no engine. There's other people that can lift you up and support you while as you go through this journey.
Yeah, I think that is true. The question is how to manifest that
Yeah.
because I think we grow up, um, I think parenthood can be pretty isolating, particularly in the first few years, because, just the intensity of having a young baby and what you're partner or wife needs and how your life is structured. So I really have tried with the Fathers Forum to help build a little community for dads during those first early years, particularly till they get to like kindergarten, first grade for their kids,
Mm-hmm.
because then they're meeting other dads, they're involved in a community with the school. But I think that's part of the problem is we don't have what I would say are safe places for dads to come and connect around being fathers. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
some churches can do it. Some hospitals and community centers are now offering fathers groups where they're focusing specifically on that. So I think it's starting. That's starting to happen. But you just think of how many mothers groups there are and how
Yeah,
easy
right.
it seems in our culture for women to connect up.
Yeah.
You can see it now with shows like yours and my website and what's happened on the web in the last say 5 or 6 years. Many more um, resources for dads have appeared, but
Mm-hmm.
for a long time the culture has seemingly made it easier for women to get together than men.
Well,
And I think we're trying to make a change. We're trying to change that.
yeah, because don't you think that's part of their genetic that they're, they can sit down and talk, whereas for men, we don't generally do that. And I think in a
I would,
generation, especially the generation like mine and yours, and our fathers and so forth. But I'm seeing in a younger generation, the men that are staying at home, they're not so closed up. They're more open to talking about, that they're afraid to be a father, or they have some fears, or they're open to learning more about what it is to be a father.
yeah, I think you're right. And I so hope that's true. I hope part of that is because the way we've been dads, where we've been engaged and active and they've
Mm-hmm.
seen what it's like as being parents and they know. So for them to see, um, that the gender roles weren't so defined, that we were more interchangeable with our wives in some ways,
Mm-hmm.
like who gets up with the kid, who does the dishes, who works, who, all of those things were shared in a way so that the younger generation, I think, is more open
Yeah.
to discussing their feelings. I think our generation and certainly our father's generation, that really wasn't possible. Men didn't share their feelings.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of seen as kind of unmanly to share your feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Like what you wouldn't want to show that vulnerability. That was a kind of weakness. Kind of meant you were like not really kind of being a man. And now we know. I think you and I know at least, and I think our work reflects that the more vulnerable we can be, the more our emotions are available to share, that's the stronger we are as men. I mean, that's what it really is about being
Mm-hmm.
a man, not being stoic and never sharing your feelings and being strong and silent. It's really
Yeah.
about being open and caring and nurturing. But I do think, Mike, I do think the culture has been harder on men in that way. And that's not
Yeah.
say that women have not had a lot that they've had to fight for. And I think the women's movement for me really helped because as women and my wife and were going out into the world and wanted to work and be a mom,
Mm-hmm.
it gave me an opportunity to be a dad more. Like I needed to be at home more.
Mm-hmm.
And so some way the women's movement kind of brought me back into the home a bit more. And somebody I studied with at one time, him and his wife did research, and they came up with a model called um, Earth Father, Sky Father. And they said, let's talk about parenting without gender. Like, let's
Mm-hmm.
don't say women do this and men do this. So, kind of getting away, kind of challenging your notion about Do the DNA of women say they are like nurturing, and the DNA of men say, oh, we're hunters, so we got to be out there in the world?
Yeah.
They said we've evolved, and we all need time out in the world, women and men.
Mm-hmm.
That's being in the sky world. And we all need time around the home, around the hearth. That's the earth world. And each man and each woman has to look at their life and say, how much sky parenting do I need to do outside the home, or sky being in the world outside the home? And how much do I need to be in the earth, be at home? So kind of looking at that, how much do we need to be out in the world? How much do we need to be at home? What is that balance for us?
Mm-hmm.
And not say that men are out there working and women are at home, or women, so that is changing. So I think that has given us a lot of opportunity as men now to say, yeah, I want to be a stay-at-home dad.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the most interesting path. And if you can work that out with your wife, and she says, well, great, I really want to have my time to have a career now.
Yeah.
That's great. But
Yeah.
mostly what I see is a balance with men and women, where they both want to have time in the outer world of work and time in the inner world of the family.
Yeah. Well, the wife is definitely going to play a huge part in that. And her expectation of what a man is also going to play a serious part in that. So if you get more women to look at men differently and what is expected from a man differently, then yeah, you can find more men will be open. But I think a lot of men have that you mentioned earlier, that vulnerability is scary because a lot of women don't want to see that in their man. So they can't let their guard down, can't be vulnerable, can't they got to still hold that masculinity that the wife sees them as, and he might not even be feeling it, but he has to still hold up to her expectations of what he should be.
Yeah. Now, I taught a couple of becoming a father classes here in California, a couple of local hospitals. And I did the becoming a father's class as an adjunct to the prenatal class they were in with their wives.
Mm-hmm.
Because the men would say, I don't think I could share this in the prenatal class with my wife and the other women, but I'm really scared,
Yeah.
or I'm afraid I'm going to see blood and faint, or I'm not sure I'm going to be up to the task of being there. So one of the things we found out was um, that if you got men together separate in this very critical time, they wanted to express their vulnerability,
Mm-hmm.
but they didn't have an opportunity to. And then what happened when the men expressed their vulnerability, and all of them felt, oh, there's something wrong with me because I'm feeling kind of frightened, and I should feel like this is going to be okay and I could do this. When they heard them expressing their vulnerability, they realized they weren't crazy. There was nothing wrong with them. We were all feeling that. It normalized their anxieties around becoming fathers. That's a normal thing that we go through. And I developed this kind of phase theory of fatherhood, and that was the first phase, the
Mm-hmm.
emergent phase, where our emotions are beginning to come out because it's such a powerful primal experience of becoming a dad. The other thing that happens in the groups, which kind of responding a little bit to you about like how can we be vulnerable as men, and we don't really talk about these things very much in the general world, and that's very true. But in the fathers group, and knock on wood, when I do a good job helping
Mm-hmm.
facilitate, like at the end of the evening, it's hard to bring the group to closure because the men have so much to say. So
Yeah.
what I've found over the years is men have a lot to say. They don't have anywhere where it feels safe, and they feel like they're in a camaraderie of brothers where they can talk about it and they're going to be heard and respected. And
Yeah.
once you feel like you're going to be heard and respected and appreciated for your experience, Men have a lot to share. They don't
Yeah.
repress their feelings, but I think that's the difference. I think the model has been more that women, it's okay to share your feelings and it's okay to talk about these things. And I think it's been more difficult for men to find places where they feel safe and trusting.
Yeah.
And I know one of the early groups I did, Mike, one of the guys in the group I was asking about coming to the group and how they felt about coming to the group. And, you know, one of the dads said, I came 20 minutes early and I sat out in the car and I wasn't sure I was going to come in the office
Mm.
because I wasn't sure I could feel comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And he got there, and he said, yes, and I do, and I'm so glad I was able to come. But I think he was speaking for a lot of men, not just himself,
Right.
about
Yeah.
taking
I
that
agree.
risk,
Yeah.
taking that risk to be vulnerable.
Yeah. I agree with you. So, what do you think is the best kept secret about fatherhood?
Well, I think the best kept secret about fatherhood is, let me tell you some of the things we know about fatherhood, which is we know that your kid is going to do better in school,
Mm-hmm.
have better social skills, um, tend to feel more secure the more dads are involved, right?
Mm-hmm.
We know that's good.
Right.
And we certainly know our wives and the moms are going to feel less stressed the more we participate
Mm-hmm.
and help out and the more engaged we are. And we know how good it feels to be a family, like when we kind of work through these challenges, going through the whole process in the early years. There are days when it just feels really good. I mean, there's some days where you feel, what did I do? How did I get myself in this mess? But
Yeah.
there are more days, there are more days it says, oh, I'm glad I'm a family. But the best kept secret, and this comes out in the dad's group, and I have originally called my groups men's groups for fathers, men's groups for new and expected fathers.
Okay.
The best kept secret is what we learn about ourselves as men. And I think we learn something very deep about, you and I were talking about it earlier, something very deep about the world of fatherhood, bigger than who we are as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I learned about myself as a man, something about patience.
Yeah.
And I think I learned something about, and this is the key that I think is the secret, I learned to care about somebody more than I cared about myself.
Hmm.
Like my son at first, and then my daughter, my children really brought me into the world of how do you care about people in a way that transcends my own selfish self-interest.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really says something about not just what love is, because, but how to love.
Yeah.
So I think the best secret of fatherhood is you'll learn about what it really means to be a man, and that it's nurturing, loving, caring, and your world can connect. You get connected to the world in ways that are much deeper than if I had never been a father and had never had to have those challenges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I know for me, being a dad is one of the best things that's ever happened to me. I have enjoyed it tremendously. My kids have been my world, for so long. And it is a joy to be a father, but I can remember, and my oldest is, she'd be 30. And so I can still remember 30 years ago the joy and the excitement that I had, before she was born, and even holding her, being, what kind of father was I going to be, is, and it was and like we talked about earlier before the show, I had a great fond memories of my dad and how he was with me. So I passed that along to my daughter, and to my kids. That's who I became. And I think a lot of times as fathers, we become, but, you know, I think part of the fear of coming a new father is the fact that you don't get to see that, how your dad went through it. You know, you just see how he was as a father, but you didn't get to see what he was like becoming a father.
Yeah, and then we all have, as you say, different models. I'd
Yeah.
like to share. We I'd like to share one story, which is in my uh, uh, one of my books. I wrote that my dad never showed up to
Hmm.
anything when I was in school or participated. I mean, he came to my high school graduation, but he never did, and how I felt sad about that, and that sort of inspired me to be more there for my kids.
Hmm.
So it had a very positive effect. But when my dad read that, and he talked to me, he said, "Well, you know why I wasn't there with those things? I was working. I had to
Right.
work."
Right.
And well, look, my dad owned his own business. He was the boss. He could have come. He could have come home. He could have come out. He didn't have to work. And I said, no, but I wish you would have come to some things. And I could see how guilty he felt. And he kept saying, well, I had to work. That's what I had to do. And then he said, at a certain point, he said, Bruce, I'm sorry. I see you would have really liked me to be there. He said, but when I was growing up, and he was really from a different generation because he was born in
Right.
1910. He was 18 during the Depression. He said, I wanted you and your brother and your sisters to have what I never had, a nice house, clothes to wear, good food to eat, a safe neighborhood to live in. I wanted you to have those things. So I felt like I had to be working all the time.
Hmm.
I look at it now, as he got older, he said, I looked at it now and I could see I didn't have to do that. I didn't have to work there, but I didn't know that at the time. And he said,
Hmm.
I never realized that you really wanted to spend time with me. He never understood that because he was so caught up in the culture that he grew up in. And in a
Right.
way that really was helpful to me to say, yeah, Dad, I know. But it also taught me something too. And I was telling you earlier when we were talking, he lived till he was 92. So we had a long and very close relationship. But
Hmm.
in the early years, they were a very traditional family. My mom was home with the kids. My dad was gone from, 8 in the morning till 6 or 7 every night. Um, and I wanted to do it differently.
Yeah.
And I struggled when I first started to do that differently because there weren't a lot of dads just on their own doing that. And I remember being at the park one day with my son and we were playing and he was about a year and a half old. And I was talking to this older woman. I think she was like Austrian or German, and
Hmm.
she was there sitting there and we were talking. I was telling her how lucky I am. I get to spend time with my son like this. I'm only working a little bit. And, my wife
Hmm.
and I are kind of co-parenting and, how I'm learning. She seemed so sweet. And at the end, she said, young man, it's so nice to talk with you. And I do hope you'll get some more work soon. As, as if I was only doing this because I couldn't get enough work. So I think, like you were saying earlier, we see a lot of men now, and maybe because of the work you and I have done and helping people and dads see, there's a very creative journey. And you want to know the meaning of life, you learn a lot about that through being a father.
Yeah.
We see a lot of dads who are actively like, oh yeah, I'm going to be there with my kids and be part of my family. I'm not just going to bring home the bacon, so to speak. I'm going to sit
Hmm.
down at the table and have dinner and be with my family and my children.
Yeah. And that's such rewarding. And you mentioned it earlier. The biggest thing of all is your kids benefit from you being actively involved in their lives. As you mentioned, there's less pregnancies, there are less dropouts of high school, there's less kids going to prison when the father is involved, and more and more. So it's important that the work that you do and the other fathers out there and the other men out there, and my organization, it's great that hopefully we are helping the next generation of fathers to
Yeah,
you know
yeah.
really
And
put a
you said,
close.
yeah, and you said something earlier too that's important when we were talking, which is we're not perfect fathers. So, we're not going to always have the patience we need. We're not always
No.
going to understand our kids as well as we'd like. But, as long everything shows that the preponderance of value is being there,
Hmm.
not necessarily even doing it right, but being
Right.
there. And you'll
Right.
get it right enough. It only has to be good enough. It's only 51% of the time. And I will tell you personally, Mike, I've had to apologize times when I lost my temper or I didn't handle a situation in a way that
Hmm.
I thought was thoughtful or kind. I've had to say to my kids, hey, I'm sorry I lost my temper, or I'm sorry I didn't understand how important that was to you.
Yeah.
Um, like it's okay to make mistakes,
Yeah.
and but it's being there and showing up as best you can that makes the difference. Really makes a huge difference in the next generation and the world. I mean, you want to change the world, you know, just work on being a good dad
Yeah.
or the best dad you can be.
Yeah. Bruce, you have said a mouthful, and you are so correct. And we have to, and it is just show up. There's no such thing as a perfect parent. You can't. You just be the best parent that you can be, and visit your form so that you can learn to increase and be better than you already are.
Yeah, I think taking an interest in the practice of fatherhood, but let me send one kind of shout out. Sometimes I see dads of separation and divorce
Hmm.
and they feel so much shame. They feel like, oh my God, it didn't work out with my wife. It's going to be really hard for my kid. And oh, how's this going to be? You know what? We have to be the best dad we can under any circumstance.
Hmm.
And I have seen and worked with some men who went to prison, who were fathers and went to prison and felt like, well, how am I going to? And we had to say, even when you're in prison, you work out, you see what opportunities you have. What can you do to reach out to your child? Can you write letters? How do you handle the
Right.
situation you're in? How can you be the best father you can be, no matter what circumstance you find yourself in? And I think that's the part that connects us into the meaning of our journey as men. Like, what can I do as a man, as a father,
Hmm.
to meet my children, to meet my children's needs as best I can in whatever way I can, whatever situation I find myself in.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely. Well, Bruce, unfortunately, that's our time. I knew from the time that we got on this that you and I can sit here and talk all day because your wealth of knowledge, and you bring some great things to the table, and that things that fathers should know about, young and old. So I want you to tell our audience how they can get a hold of you and how they can find the Father's Forum.
Okay, a couple of things. If you just go to our website, my website, uh, fathersforum.com, you can contact me through there if you have any questions or anything. If you're a dad with a child under 5 and you'd like to be in a fathers group, I have a virtual fathers group that meets on Sundays, and you can let me know you're interested, and I'll get in touch with you, give you a little information about the group, and you're welcome to see if you'd like to participate. You can always come to one meeting and see if it works for you. And a couple of other things. There's some books on the website. My most recent book that I think, Mike, you mentioned earlier is Fatherhood, The Journey from Man to Dad. And it's available on Amazon, and it's also available. You can get it as paperback on Kindle. And I also have an audio book, so you can just listen to the book. So that's there. And then also, if there are any dads out there who are listening and who are possibly um, possibly therapists themselves or counselors or part of an organization and would like to just talk about how they might do something like the Fathers Forum at their group or organization or as part of their practice as psychotherapists, that they can contact me too, and I'd be happy to talk with them about that. And I'm sorry, Mike, to be moving my screen around a little bit, but you can see there's a little black dot there because some of the pixels died in my camera.
Yeah, I saw that.
Get that off my face a little bit and get it into the background.
Yeah, yeah, I can see
But
that.
Mike, thank you so much for inviting me on the show and for keeping this discussion going and enlarging the discussion to a larger community of men and women and fathers of all ages that they can begin to hear. What a great, great journey it is for us to have the opportunity, to have the great opportunity to be a dad.
Yeah. Well, you are more than welcome, and it definitely has been an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show. And yeah, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for you to come out and to be on the show and taking your time out of your day to do so. So thank you so very, very much.
Oh, you're quite
Yeah.
welcome, Mike.
All right.
My honor.
All right. Well, Bruce, I'm gonna close out the show. Hang tight. And but ladies and gentlemen, that is our show for today. And I tell you, I have really, really enjoyed having Bruce on the show and bringing his knowledge. And I think it's really going to benefit a lot of fathers. But I want to tell you, if you are looking for resources, please go to the Father Show resource program and click on resources, and you'll find resources that can help you. And I'm gonna hope to get Dr. Bruce his information on our website as well, so you can find him. But you have it right here on the show. But you can find that resource. You can find therapists, other attorneys, and other resources that help you to get you through your day-to-day lives. But don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this program, and let other men and even the wives know about the show as well. This is for everybody, but we want to make sure that you can get this show and other shows anytime that you want, so you can listen to us and hear us on our Facebook page, on LinkedIn, Twitter, Spotify, Amazon, Pandora, iHeart, TuneIn, Stitcher, and other apps. So we want to thank you for joining us today, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week on The Father Show. Until then, God bless, stay safe, and don't let this COVID-19 get you. Stay very safe. All right. God bless you and thank you. And we'll see you next week.